This is the Almost Awakened Podcast, a no-nonsense approach to spirituality with your hosts, Brittany Hartley and Bill Reel. Here we dive deep into the wisdom traditions while acknowledging insightful breakthroughs in science, psychology, and human development. Our goal is to explore the good life and the very best of spirituality. No nonsense required. Check us out at almostawakened.org, where you can check out past episodes, make a donation, email us a question or comment, or find out more about the resources we shared. And now, today's podcast episode.
All right. Welcome to another episode of the Almost Awakened Podcast. Brittany Hartley, how are you doing?
I'm so good. You'll never guess what I did this week.
I won't be able to.
I flew down to Phoenix to visit my father, and he's always kind of struggled with anxiety and depression. And I took down some plant medicine, and this is my active LDS father, and we took a journey together.
Ooh.
And it was very healing, like deep therapy, very helpful for him, very therapeutic. And then woke up and his depression was a lot better. And so it was my first experience where I was a guide. So as a guide, you take a lower dose so that you can step in with them, but you're not kind of lost in your own space. And so that was super interesting to it was a new experience for me to let my intuition totally guide. I'm just there with you, and my intuition is just going to help guide you wherever you're going, which was a new experience for me. So yeah, I did something I thought I would never do with my father, and I wish every child could do with their parent. And it was really cool.
So you can say as little or as much as you want. I'm curious what plant medicine. I would guess shrooms.
Yeah.
Okay. And dosage, what did he take and what did you take, if I can ask?
So he was at about 3.5 and I was about 1.5.
Yeah.
So for me, I had no visuals. It was low enough that I didn't have visuals, but it was enough that your ego just kind of takes a nap, and my intuition could just kind of like go with him. And that was a new experience because when you're a guide and you take a lower dose, you're almost kind of straddling their experience and kind of reality so that you can walk with them and not, if I had taken, as much as him, I would have gone off into my own space. So that was a really new experience and something that I really enjoyed, and a gift. I'm flying down to Phoenix to offer this gift to my father. And because he trusted me, he was able to do that. But it's something that I hope to learn to do as part of being the spiritual director, that this is maybe one of the gifts. And if I can learn this craft, maybe help guide others through it. But it was really powerful.
I've got to imagine that he tackled some real things. There was, every time I've had an experience with mushrooms, and I can relate to the 1.5 gram dose, and I can relate to the 3.5 gram dose. 3.5 grams is a good solid dose. You're gonna go where the medicine wants you to go. It's gonna do its trick. In those experiences, it becomes, I don't know what the right wording is, but it just happens that you tackle things that are just below the surface that need tackling. So I'm just amazed at that. I'm really grateful that you shared that. And I hope, as you're saying, that that's not only good for him in that moment and the next day, but there's things that have positive consequences weeks and months later, and sometimes even years later.
Yeah. So my parents got divorced about a year ago, and he just was really struggled. Just kind of we all get caught in the story of something. And so this was really helpful to like break out of the story and see it in a different way and process it. Right.
Yeah.
I will say though, I had I'm such a, I have a long history of being a good Mormon girl, and I flew through the airport, and that gave me a little bit of a panic attack. But
I can relate to that as well.
Yeah. I I wait for the day when this is more accessible, because I didn't like that aspect of
Yeah.
making this possible. But if
Yeah.
I were to go back, I would do it again,
Yeah.
because it was such a gift to my father, who has depression and struggling with processing this divorce. And he got to kind of come up for air and take a breath. And that was like, I just still look back and say it was one of the best gifts that you can give someone. And so it was worth the risk to me. But it was, the risk is there. I'm honest about it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Yeah. I've done some of those things enough times. That would have been impressive. And like you say, 1.5 is a good way to be somewhat in that space, but not blasting off to your own place. For instance, I would recommend no one do high doses of mushrooms with me, because I will hijack your experience, and I will be overwhelming to anybody that's in my space. I don't have any calmness to me in those spaces. And I kind of start with this assumption that everyone's having the exact same experience. And
so are you talkative? Are you talkative during your experiences? Oh, you're just like processing and talking, and that's how
I'm sharing all these cool things coming up, as if you're seeing those and hearing those and feeling those too, which keeps you from ever having your experience.
Yeah. I'm in the corner crying about some unique version of hell. And that's, my friends know, like, there's Britt over there. She'll be okay. She's just going through some stuff.
One of the coolest things that happened to me under mushrooms is, in our brains, we can pull out a memory. So say your 10th birthday, whatever memories stick out to you, and you can see it, but you kind of see it as an observer. Like, oh yeah, I remember that. I got that tricycle at my 5th birthday, or whatever thing it is. But it's not like you relive the memory. When I was on shrooms, I had this experience where I've never had it happen before. I literally am back in the memory. I can smell my old house. I'm in the bedroom with my wife. We're sitting on the bed. We're talking. Everything about it was like reliving it. And it to the extent where it was different than a dream, it was a real memory. And here I am, like, inside the memory, doing it all over again. It was really cool, because what it taught me is that our brains can do things that we haven't yet fathomed, right? Our brains can do tricks that we haven't even learned yet.
Yeah. I'll share one thing. So a lot of this experience was processing my mother, like, who's central kind of in this divorce, and we're processing all of that. And there was this moment that came up, and talking about intuition here. So if you would have asked me, do you have any issues or pain that comes up with your mom? And my conscious brain would have said before this experience, no, like, we're fine, we're good, our relationship is fine. And then in it, I was talking about how, like, I'm watching my daughter Phoenix, and my mom is kind of withdrawing from her because emotional intimacy is really difficult. Anyway, I'm talking about this, and all of a sudden, I realized that I have this deep pain as I'm watching my mother, who was really nurturing when they were newborns, kind of emotionally withdraw with my children. And so it's almost as if I'm the 6-year-old now watching this happen. And I just it was not even on my radar. Had no idea that I had some pain about this, because it was like one of those things where your intuition's watching and feeling everything, but only a small amount makes it to, like, your conscious brain. And so, like, we're having to process things that our intuition is like, ooh, that's painful. I'm not even going to bring it up to conscious brain over here, though. But it was there. And so I had to talk about it. I had to cry about it, And so it was really, that's the power of it. And then what I think is also the power is the next day or the next couple days, the negative thoughts were a little bit less. It's a little bit sunnier in the brain. It was really, I just couldn't, I'm watching my dad, and I'm just like, I can't imagine not giving this gift to him and at least trying to see if it helps. So I did. I tried. I took a risk, and it was a really cool experience. I wish everybody could do deep therapy with their parents.
Yeah.
Because it was.
It is at least nice to know that these things are on the horizon, right? Another 25 years, and probably most of the United States will have its populace have access to plant medicine. And so that's coming, and it's good because PTSD, depression, these things are showing successes in ways that no other opioid or any other drug has done.
Yeah.
And so
I'd be curious to see how it was my first time being a guide. And I was surprised that I did pretty well in the sense that I let my intuition take over and I wasn't in my headspace. I was just full intuition, which is hard for me, right? And so I'd be curious if you could do that. Like, could you, someone you care about, could you really focus on them with like 1.5? Could you focus on them and their journey and go with them? It's a different experience. Anyway.
Just a Maven, who's the show producer for another show we do, says, hypothetical question, are shrooms detectable in blood and urine samples? And if so, for how long? I'm not aware of any drug test that finds them. And all the reading online that I know about says essentially you could do mushrooms without ever being detected in your blood or urine. And hence, if you are drug tested for a job, shrooms, well, I wouldn't do shrooms recreationally. I just don't think it's something you could do twice a week and have fun with.
If I can ask, how often do you plan on doing it?
For me, it's not as much a positive experience. I learn things, but I'm very alone in the universe, and I'm very disconnected from all of my relationships. And it's a very lonely 5 hours. At times it can be funny. At times I'm learning things. There was one time where I really felt like I learned everything the universe had to give me. And I felt like I had it, like I was holding on to it. And then as I came out of it, it just all went. I didn't have it anymore.
I did have an experience. You kind of went into like ape history a little bit on one of yours. And
ayahuasca, yeah.
And when I put my dad to bed, I kind of jumped back into the stream. And I actually kind of ended up going there a little bit too, which is a first time thing. But I plan on doing it probably once or twice a year.
Yeah.
They haven't been, mine aren't unicorns and rainbows either, but it's really helpful for, I struggle with depression. I especially struggle with getting stuck in thought loops in depression. So really just for mental health, I plan on doing it at least once a year for the rest of my life. Yeah.
In the receptors in your brain, you actually can't do it multiple times in a week. Your brain, I don't know how to explain it, but the receptors in your brain for the chemicals that cause you to essentially trip, they essentially get worn out that night. And if you now take it the next day, you would have essentially no effect. You just can't do them day after day. And as you're pointing out, same thing. I think the ideal, if you if that's the plant medicine that you're drawn to once every 3 months, once every 6 months, once a year, somewhere in that range, seems to be about right. But yeah. And so anyway, and again, I just don't think any drug tests are not only not looking for, they just don't find, that's not the thing they're looking for or finding. So as far as I know, there's not a single drug test that looks for magic mushrooms in somebody's blood or urine. And I just see Dan Hardy's got a comment there, mushrooms once a year for depression, ? And he seems to be laughing. The reality is, if Dan wants to go look at the data is actually super strong that a single experience with mushrooms, about 75% of people report it as the greatest experience in their life. And the data shows that in dealing with depression or PTSD, a single dose can do absolute wonders. And so that science is in the last
not even just like reduce symptoms, but people can wake up the next day and say, I have no symptoms of PTSD or depression. And that can last for months. I
know with Molly, they did 3 therapeutic sessions and 76% of people had no PT. They reported like 1 year later, absolutely no PTSD from what they had before. So
it's like a brain reset, and it really helped me. So I didn't know we were going to spend so much time talking about this, but that's what I did this week. So
cool. No, I'm glad. These are the kind of conversations I think we want to have. Today's subject, I want to talk about friendship and kind of social etiquette. And I just thought, you had brought up, and I had brought up several months ago that, people had really loved the hero's journey conversation where you and I are just kind of riffing off each other. And we thought going forward, we'd try to have a lot of these conversations where we just pick a topic and just kind of talk about it and the things that we've learned or the things that we think would be important to share with our audience. And friendship is a big deal to me. I really love my friends. They're really helpful to me having a happy, healthy life. And they are a huge resource to me for continued learning, growth, being accountable to my own behavior, having people who support me the way I am rather than kind of needing me to be something. But I thought where I'd start, and this kind of pisses people off, but I've often said friendship is a myth too. Like everything is myth. And I don't think anybody wants to hear that, but the reality is two human beings in relationship with each other, that only works so long as both sides are getting something from it. They're both essentially having Gottman's ratio of so many good experiences to bad experiences. And the moment somebody shifts or moves and becomes something different than what they were the day before, that friendship is also every day changing. And in friendships, while they are real, they also aren't real. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but
Yeah.
it's a myth too.
How I would explain that is that you learn at some point that nobody can fully understand your experience of what it is to be you in the world. There's not a single person, Brene Brown herself, and 10 years of being your best friend can still never fully understand what it is at the level of experience to be you in the world. So at some level you have to actually let that go, which is hard because sometimes, especially in like pop psychology or pop culture, you read things like, oh, I just want a partner who understands all of me and just is safe for all parts of who I am. And it's like, good luck trying. And the best analogy I've heard is that I'm out here in my own wilderness. And the thing that makes the wilderness really nice is finding other people out there in their own wilderness too. And when you talk, you realize that I've been on kind of this mountain. Oh, I've been to a place just like that, and we can talk about it, right? But we're not actually in the same place at the same time experiencing the same thing. The friendship for me is the camaraderie in knowing that there's other people out here in the wilderness too. And talk to me about the things you've seen and the things you've experienced, because sometimes you've been a place where I've never even heard of. And sometimes we've been to a place, oh, I've been to that place too. I recognize that landmark in my experience too. And then you feel not so alone, but you're still in your own wilderness.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of process that.
Yeah. And the Buddhist idea is that everyone's living their own dream, right? You're inside your head as the center of your own story, and somebody else next to you, while they bump into you from time to time, the reality is they're having a completely separate dream. And relationships ebb and flow. So I've got folks in my life who are still friends, but they were really good friends a year ago or 5 years ago. And now they're friends still, but it's different. And I have other folks who aren't my friend anymore. For whatever reason, relationships are always changing. There is nothing that stands still, and you're changing, they're changing. And so of course the relationship itself is going to change.
And I think it's really healthy, and tell me if you made the shift in your marriage too, but I think it's really healthy to be honest and admit that different people bring out different sides of us, right? So I have friends that pull out, different parts of me. And I think one of the reasons that marriages are just, we set these up to fail is that we almost set marriage up to fail in Mormonism in a way that like your partner is your end all be all, right? Like your partner is the one that's going to understand your experience and be the one you laugh with and be the one. And then like, you have these men who like won't do business with females because like I have a wife and like I can't do anything without my wife. And it almost sets the marriage up to have so much pressure that this person is going to be everything. And then you end up having two lonely people because nobody can be everything for anyone. And so my marriage got so much better when my need for philosophical conversations, when I like outsourced that and found friends for that who really love that, instead of trying to force my partner to be that person when he wasn't. Like that helped my marriage a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a lesson I've had to learn in the last few years as well, that none of us can be everything to everyone. And the expectation of what a spouse or a friend will be on the front end of life is completely different of the reality of it, or at least closer to the reality of it. So I can completely relate to that. I was thinking about, a couple of things that we could go into in this topic. One is vulnerability and belonging. And my first thought here is that you and I have both been in systems where everybody needs to fit a role and fit in a box. And the friendships are very surface level. And I don't mean that offensively. They just are, because everything that's taboo, every piece of because vulnerability is you sharing the things that you fear that you'll receive shame over. And so by being vulnerable, you are putting out things to a friend, to a loved one, where you feel afraid that maybe this person's going to judge you or feel shame. So in a high demand fundamentalist religion, all the things that are taboo, all the things that are sin, all the things that aren't allowed to be talked about, those are the things that we feel shame over if we're built those ways that are admonished against by the religious system. And so these friendships that I had, I could only give so much of myself to them. I could only say so many things. And if I said too much, I risked being an outsider in the community. So I deconstruct the system. I go back into the world to make new relationships. And I have all these friends. And we think, like, I hear people who are deconstructing Mormonism, for instance, and stepping away. I hear folks say things like, the system made me had all these boundaries and all these rules, and I had to be all these things that weren't me. And when I left, I got to be completely me and got to do all the things I wanted to do. And I kind of chuckle at that, because that's not real either. That even though I think I have really good friends that were similar enough that there's a lot of room for me to be myself, the reality is that there are still boundaries and rules inside my new community, to the point where if you think your friends, are really willing to tolerate every bit of you, have a shit show for 3 or 4 times in a row while you're around them, and see how quickly they're calling you to go out for coffee again. You still have to compromise parts of yourself to be what the collective is willing to tolerate. Now, there's a lot more space, perhaps, but it's not a free-for-all.
I think that is such an important narrative for post-religious spaces, because you're right. And it reminds me of, I'm going to quote Cammie Hurst here, who was on our show, the sex therapist. And she says a lot of what she sees in her office is people claiming their authenticity, but it's just doing the opposite of kind of what they were told to do. And so if you tell a child, don't eat all the chocolate in the house, and just to spite you, I'm my own self, I'm going to eat all the chocolate in the house. Well, you're still kind of in the system, right? Yeah. You're responding opposingly, but you're still kind of sucked into the system. And so she said something like, it takes a lot of maturity to find authenticity that just isn't the opposite of the boundaries that you had, right? That takes a lot of maturity to say, I'm going to be vulnerable here. I'm going to test these waters, but I'm going to respect people's boundaries and space and where they're at and all these things. That's a narrative that we don't hear enough in post-religious spaces, because the overwhelming narrative is, out here we're free and we can do whatever we want, and look at us be free without so many rules. And it's like there's a shadow to that side of thinking too, which is you become a bulldozer with your authenticity, and that's not healthy for relationships too. And we don't hear that enough in post-religious spaces.
So I make the note that good friends allow you to be significantly more of your authentic self without shame. But again, this space also still has boundaries. You've got a couple notes here too, it looks like.
Yeah. So a shift that I like to work with people when they're trying to like break out and make friends for the first time. Because for a lot of people deconstructing, it's really like, how do I make friends for the first time without this kind of like fitting in scaffolding, right? That we've used, this kind of crutch that we've used. And one of the things is shifting that when you're going into a social situation, the goal is I'm going to be as much of myself as is appropriate, right? That's the goal. That my inner child is safe, that I feel like I was myself. That's the goal. Versus I'm going to go and try to be liked and try to be loved. Because when you go with the intent of, I'm going to this group of people, I really want them to like me. I'm going to manipulate what I do, and I'm going to laugh at jokes that aren't really that funny, and I'm going to try to fit in there so that they'll see me and then they'll love me. When you go in with that approach, you're really setting yourself up for either you're going to feel like you fit in, but you had to contort yourself to fit in, or you're not going to fit in and you're going to feel a ton of shame. It's going to be, I tried to get these people to like me and they didn't, therefore I am broken. That's where our brain goes. And so the shift that I think is really helpful is to go into situations and think, I'm going to be as much of myself as I can. That's the goal. And if you did that, then you win. Like, I did it. Like, that was a successful social outing. And some of those times people are really going to respond to that authentic self of you, and sometimes not. But the goal is that you always show up. You don't shrink, you don't puff up, you show up and let yourself be seen as much as it is appropriate.
Yeah, I like that. I was at a party a few weeks ago. There probably were 50 to 75 people there. And all through the night, everybody was finding the little pods, little groups where they could share pieces of themselves. It just felt very accepting. By the end of the night, people are sitting out in the backyard and just kind of either laying down or sitting down and just really connect with each other. There was a band that played that night. It was just a really fun experience. It was one of these rarities, which most parties I can sense that people are really uncomfortable. They second guess the things they say. They're not sure if how much of themselves are going to be accepted or not. And this is one of those moments where it just felt like everybody got what they came for. They got their needs met, whatever those were. And I don't think that happens much. I think most of the time we are inside our own heads trying to be parts of ourselves and fearful that it's not working, that people are rejecting us, that someone else has a perspective that runs counter to ours. And so we're bumping into each other a little bit. And I think most people go home from a social gathering kind of beating themselves up and trying to figure out, if what they said was okay or if what they did was okay. And
Yeah,
it's unfortunate because I don't think most of us feel that way about the other people at the party. We just
I
do it to
know.
ourselves.
I know. It's our primal brains. Like, we're just really trained to know where we are in a social hierarchy, right? That's our brain history, is where are you in this social hierarchy? Because if you're not anywhere and not being accepted on this social hierarchy, you are dead, right? You're outside the cave and you're dead. And that's why it's like, for our brains, like, such a big deal. Does this person like me? And so it does take a little bit of thought work to get through that and say, like, oh, I wasn't this person's cup of tea. Like, I'm actually not going to die. And so it's interesting that the thing that we do is the biggest barrier. So Brene Brown says fitting in is the biggest barrier, is the primary barrier to belonging. So the thing that we're doing to try to belong is the biggest barrier to actual belonging, which is these little moves that we do to try to fit in, right?
Mm.
And so it's so interesting that it's one of those times where our brains, because of its history, it's not fitting kind of what we're needing in reality. It's kind of like our brains, if you start eating sugar, your brain says, eat all this sugar because there may not be food again, right? Because we still have these little very Paleolithic brains, when in reality, I have sugar around me all of the time. I will never not have enough sugar. And so it's this thing that you kind of have to do with your brain to kind of shift. I know it feels like it's going to be scary to not do those little moves to try to fit in, but you'll actually feel more belonging if you step into that space that can feel scary. Yeah.
Yeah, something you said there connects to this next idea. How to build authentic friendships after religious deconstruction. And I've thought a lot about this. And I feel like this isn't always possible. And here's what I mean. I think the folks who tend to deconstruct are the folks who don't exactly fit in the first place. It's easier for those folks. So if you're a little quirky, if you're a little eccentric, if you're whatever the things are that make you you, I feel like the folks who end up in religious deconstruction, there's a higher percentage of folks who don't exactly fit in anyway. And so for me, I think it came pretty easy. I just started having gatherings. I started to essentially try to collect people. I would go out with, 5 people, and 2 of them I would know and 3 would be new. And 2 of those 3 I just really got along with. So I reach out to those 2 again and invite them to the next party. And now there's, 5 people that I know, and now there's 2 new people or 3 new people. And just over time, I had collected, and again, I don't mean to like objectify people or anything, but I had collected all these really good humans that I wanted to be in space with that made my life enjoyable. And when we were talking to Bart Campolo in that 2-part interview, he said there's got to be a place for the misfits. And I worry sometimes that it's not easy for a lot of folks to make connections. So I don't want to sit and talk about it like it's easy. But as you're pointing out, you have to put yourself out there. You have to try. And so I think the easiest way, I'm really lucky. I live in Southern Utah. So having ex-Mormonism be kind of the first degree of interaction for most people in this area, that just works well. It gives us that kind of common bond. And then very
it's
quickly
trauma bonding, and then you can go from that.
Move into other things. And I can't imagine if I still lived in Ohio and had deconstructed my system, how I would find friends. I mean, I go to the bar and I just start talking to strangers, and like, I don't even know how I would do that. And so it's easy in Utah, for my life experience, to be able to connect with somebody at the very beginning of a conversation and build some bridges and see if we like each other. I don't think it's easy for everyone. I think for some folks it's really difficult. And I don't want to diminish that. Like, I think we just have to own it and say sometimes building community for some folks is really tough. Yeah. But you do need friends. Everybody needs a few people that they can lean on and enjoy life with and go through life with.
Yeah. So a couple of things come up here. Unfortunately, the answer for everyone is going to be vulnerability, right? So even for the person who maybe is not as extroverted as you or doesn't have as many opportunities, you've had this podcast, you meet people, you did have some resources there for building a tribe.
Yeah.
But even for people who don't, I was talking to a client last week who just really wanted better male friendships. And I do think this is one of the areas where women tend to do better than men, in the sense that one of the things that we do to men is that we, in any kind of patriarchal religion, is we shame them for being a part of patriarchy. And then when they leave, there's no kind of social place for men to be vulnerable, right? So if I wanted to ask 6 girlfriends out to dinner to talk about my marriage or whatever, that's socially acceptable, but it's less socially acceptable for men. And so I do think this is a place where especially men struggle post-religious deconstruction, because you do have to reach out vulnerably, which is really hard and really not modeled in society. And so they're out there without the church now, without any modeling, really just being a weirdo, asking people to go to coffee. And that can be difficult, because now you're fighting against some social norms, and that is hard. But even so, the answer to that is still going to be vulnerability. So this guy was going to yoga classes, and there were lovely women and men there, but mostly women. Yoga is mostly a female space. And he wanted to be friends with these women without coming off like a creep, which is another hard thing for men, right? Yeah. You have these social norms. And so the answer to that was to do it with full vulnerability. And so I challenged him that week to go up to a woman and say, I'm just going to be vulnerable with you here. I think you women are amazing. I know that you guys go out for coffee after yoga. I need some better friends and I would love to join you. And I'm just afraid that I would seem like a creep, but I'm not. I'm just really trying to find better friends. Like, that's vulnerable. That's sharing what he actually feels, which is, I really like you women, but I'm scared that, and I want to have better friends, but I'm scared that I'm going to come off as a creep and I'm not trying to. Like, that was what he was really feeling. So the answer as far as what to do in that situation was to actually lead with that and see what happens. Because that was the best way to like de-escalate the situation. When he led with vulnerability, the woman was actually able to respond with her own vulnerability. Oh yeah, I need better friends too. Come join us, you know? So there's a lot of tricky things here. Sometimes it can be harder for men than women just because of social norms, which is why I wanted to ask you. You're someone who has, you had some resources to be able to build a tribe, both in your personality and then the podcast, and then you can do a lot of trauma bonding with ex-Mormonism and build from there. Those are a lot of resources. But something that you've done that I haven't seen very many men do is that you enjoy touch in your relationships.
Yeah.
It's one of your love languages. So tell me what it was like the first time. You're a Mormon man, all we do is shake hands. Like, unless it's your wife, you just shake hands. So how did you make the transition, or how did it feel the first time you said, like, do you mind if I put my arm around you? Like, how did you go through that process?
Yeah, great question. When I printed off the outline, I saw that you had added that. I thought, oh, here we go. So one is I did just what you said a moment ago, which is I was vulnerable. I would constantly be telling group, after I'd built a relationship with people, after people could see that I was a decent human being and that I was trustworthy, I would notify them that, hey, like, touch is my love language. And if anybody ever wants to be in space with me and sit down next to me and put an arm around me or hold my hand, I welcome that. And as I went to parties and went to social gatherings, if you're around real people enough, you'll start to sense that everybody's trying to figure out, I shouldn't say everybody, but most people are trying to figure out how they can get more intimacy from their life. And so you start to sense these conversations and you start to see that folks are trying to figure that out. And so I'd go to a party and you just, like, again, this party I was at a couple of weeks ago, you could tell right away that there were certain people who needed physical connection and they would sit next to somebody else who also needed physical connection. Like, they just found each other. And that's not really going to be helpful to the audience, but by notifying folks, again, I'm not a creeper, but I really like connection. I really like intimacy. I really like physical touch. And so when I'm at gatherings, I can kind of sense other people there who are also wanting that. I'm also lucky in that some of my friends modeled that for me. I've got one friend, Chris, who, and not the Chris you're thinking of, but another Chris, who very much is in that same mold. He really is an extrovert. He really wants to be in physical space with other people. And so he just takes risk. So he will go sit next to somebody and put an arm around them. And you just see over the course of one party or three parties that his intentions are good. He doesn't come off as trying to manipulate anybody. And so I could easily see modeled like, hey, if you're just a normal person and you're not looking to manipulate someone, like, you do have chances to have access to those things. I don't even know how it per se happens. I know I've been to numerous parties where I just sit down next to somebody and you can kind of feel this little dance going on. Like, I need that. I want that, and suddenly you're holding hands with somebody. You've got an arm around someone. My wife, everybody comes to her for her hugs. She'll hug you super long. And her hugs seem like people walk away going like, that hug did more for me than anything else tonight.
Yeah, I have one friend like that who it's actually one of my guides who, when she hugs me, like, she holds my soul. And I don't know how to explain how she does that, but she does.
Amanda does that.
Yeah, interesting. So I think if I were to have some like answer here, if someone were to ask me, how do I build this tribe post deconstruction? I think the first thing is, like, you've got to find a platform first, right? So for both of us, that platform was, we kind of made groups to process deconstruction, which is actually pretty common for the religion that we come from. There's groups in almost every major city. And I literally 4 years ago looked around and said, I need to talk about this with other people and I need better friends. And we started gathering people for this group. And now we don't really meet so often. We don't really do trauma bonding anymore because now we're best friends. Like, but you have to have a platform first. So like, we play soccer together, we do yoga together, and then I really like this person, and then I start building something. So you do have to like be intentional as far as like, where is the platform where I can at least like meet people who are maybe interested in doing in deeper friendships. And then once you have that platform, you're a vulnerability machine. Hey, I really like you. And it's almost like, as an adult, you're almost like it feels like you're asking someone to go out on a date when you're trying a new friendship. Like, hey, I really like your vibe and I really think you're cool and interesting. And I would love to like pick your brain and get to know you more. Do you want to go for a coffee? Like, yeah, it feels a little weird. You're asking someone on a date. But when you lead with that vulnerability, if they say no, then they say no. And you still led with yourself. And it's a little sad, but it's not crushing because you didn't need their love. You're just leading with, this is me. And I'd like to get to know you. Right. And so I do think you have to find that platform first, which is why I really do encourage a lot of people to, if you don't have a place where you can deconstruct with other people, to make that place, because those will become your best friends. And then after you kind of have that platform, you just have to always be leading with vulnerability, as much as is socially appropriate, and giving other people the chance to respond. That's going to be how you belong. You're muted.
If you're not in places where you have an instantaneous connection, so say again, Southern Utah, the faith community we came from, there's just tons of people here, and that becomes really easy as kind of a first layer of connection. But if you're in places where that's not easy, it's not obvious, there are other things, right? There's hiking groups, there's ballroom dancing groups, there's Dungeons and Dragon groups. I mean, whatever your thing is, there are groups of people out there doing it. And maybe you don't find anything that's your thing. Maybe you don't know what your things are, or maybe there isn't a group that represents whatever your thing is. In that case, you have to take another step and try something new. Join something I think maybe you'll like.
Yes.
My wife and I did ballroom dancing.
It's like dating for new possible people. So you're not even on the date yet with an actual person. You're just, I don't even know what kind of person I like, so I'm just going to go on a bunch of dates.
Yeah. What do they call that? That rapid fire dating. What do they call? And
I don't know.
It's kind of like
I've never done it.
So Amanda and I did ballroom dancing lessons back in Ohio when we lived there, and we went for like 2 years, and there were folks that we connected with. We do a decent rumba and a decent swing, but not so good on the cha-cha. So
see, I learn things about you every time we talk.
Good. And so there are ways to put yourself out there so that you at least have some sort of commonality. Even if it's your first time trying some new thing, you're there because of the purpose of that group. So say it's a hiking group, you now have a chance to start the conversation with questions about hiking or insights about hiking, whatever it is. You got to put yourself out there. And I think that's the scariest part sometimes, is going like, hey, I don't even know where to start. And the reality is you just got to be in space with other humans. And as you point out, be yourself and invite whoever you connect with to meet up again, to do something new, to go grab a coffee or to go to dinner.
And honestly, really my best relationships are all people where either I saw something or they saw something in me, where there was a text during the week, hey, I just would love to take you out to coffee. You just seem super interesting to me. I'm trying to make better. Like, I've had many text conversations that started with, I'm really trying to make better friends and have better women in my tribe. And I'd really like to get to know you better. Either me doing that to someone or them doing that to me. And like, that's how it started. And so leading with vulnerability, it is scary, but that's the only way through. It's just the only way through.
Yeah. We're going to get here into some traits of what makes a good friend. The first place I wanted to start was recognizing that your friends will have different gifts. It's not like everybody is the same human. They're all different. And so as I was thinking about friends that are my friends. I was thinking, I can name a certain individual who is the best in the group at remembering people's names, like your children's names and the events in your children's lives. Like she does a beautiful job of kind of holding on to all that information. And every time she sits down with you, she asks how each one of your kids are doing by name. She knows what we talked about the last time we were together in shared space. And she's going like, hey, how did things go after that last time when we talked about your kid having this challenge or that kid having that
like
challenge? So, and I don't notice that as a gift among all my friends. There's a very select group, and she's the best, but there's a very select group of people who kind of have that information at their recall. We have friends who offer safe spaces to be vulnerable first. Like they're the first ones to be vulnerable, and they invite you into vulnerability. We have friends who are really humorous. They just do a hell of a good job of making you laugh. So no matter what's going on, you're just going to have laughs that night if that person's in the room. There are people who hold me accountable. I have friends who, when I screw up, they come to me, put an arm around me and go, hey, Bill, like that thing you did wasn't cool. And so I know I can trust them to be honest about what's healthy or unhealthy as they perceive me acting in the world. I have friends who have zero judgment. I have friends who see my diverse experience and perspective as just as legitimate as theirs. I remember being at a party once, and we were all talking about the universe and our beliefs around God. And in that group was somebody who believed in reincarnation. There was somebody who believed that plants have a consciousness and could communicate to them. We had friends who still were in kind of a religious paradigm. It became obvious that everybody was in a different place. And I think I'm right about the world, but sure, like we all think we're right about the world. Can you allow somebody to be very different than you, and you honor that, hey, there's really no way to know if they're right or I'm right. The reality is I need to honor their life experience and their perspective as just as valid as mine. So there are those kinds of things.
So what would you say if I were to ask your friends what your friendship gift is? What is your friendship gift? What do you offer to your friends?
Yeah. Zero judgment. Like they can do good or bad in the world, and we can talk about that. And I don't have any attachment to needing them to be anything different than they are. Because I want to be me and I don't feel it's safe and I feel lots of fear of shame. I'm one of those who very quickly will jump into the taboo and make it, I'll expose myself first and make it completely safe for you to expose yourself. And we just had a party at our house the other night. I had just met a couple like a month earlier at a party at my home, first time meeting them. And they're like, hey, we want to hang out again. I said, perfect, let's do it. So we had an event last week at my home, and it was this couple, and they brought two other couples with them. Again, these other four people I'd never met ever, and the one couple I'd met once. And we went out to dinner, had a great time, and very quickly they perceived that I was a safe person to be themselves around. So as they came back to our house, we got in the hot tub, had a few drinks and everything. It became very obvious quickly that everybody was just wanting to be seen and have validation and be themselves. And it really worked out so beautifully because the space was safe for that. I'm not the person who's going to remember your kids' names. I'm not the person who's going to know what we talked about the last time and rehash those events unless it's something that really sticks in my mind, and most things don't. We all come to the table with certain gifts, and we ought to recognize that it's because humans are different. And if you can put a collage of friends together that all have different gifts, I think it benefits your tribe drastically.
I think if my friend, I'm trying to think of, this is maybe one of those questions that's easier for your friends to answer about you than you to answer about yourself. But when I'm thinking of like when my friends reach out to me and say like, I need to talk to like you, like nobody else, like Britt, I think the gifts that I have are, I think I have two. One is that if you're in a really dark place, uh, for whatever reason, I'm just a really, really safe person for that, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to be a spiritual director, is because when people reach out to meet with like a spiritual guide, it's usually because they're in existential crisis, right? And because I've maybe just spent time in that space, and I tend to have gone further down that rabbit hole than most people. If you're in like a dark night of the soul, like I'm definitely like the friend in your circle that you want to call. Like I can really sit with you in that space. And then the second one is, I think, language. I have a lot of friends who, such a language person, it's kind of my creativity. In some of like my podcasts, my solo podcast that I've done on here, I'll try to kind of like, I'm painting a picture through language. And so if someone is having like feelings or emotions, or they're trying to make sense of something and they're just kind of pouring it out, I can kind of give language to it and give it back, which can sometimes be really helpful, especially if someone's not as language oriented. I really process a lot through language. And so I think some of my friends have found it helpful to, like, call me for coffee and just like help me process this thing, and I can give words to things. So I would say those two are the ones that, like, if you're in a dark night of the soul, or you want to really process something with some language and help me just kind of paint this picture here, I would say that those are two of my gifts there. But one other one that I was thinking of that Brene Brown talks about, something that you need to explore if you want to have good friends, is to find ways to play where there's no other purpose other than to just play. And as soon as she said that, I knew, like, that's the one that, because like I enjoy these heavy spaces and these philosophical spaces, that's the one that I struggle with the most, is playing with friends. And so she said that you have to find ways to laughter, song, and dance. And those three, if you were raised in a fundamentalist Puritan kind of religion, are going to be hard. Hard to let go and to laugh and sing and dance and be silly and do nothing in that moment except you're playing, and the purpose is just to play at like your children, and to find people who are adults who can do that with you. And I would say that's one that I'm not great at yet, and I need to practice more.
So this person says, just a question, why do we need friends? We've been married almost 40 years and never had friends in or out of religion. We are very happy. And I'll note, like, not everyone is a social creature. But the human race generally is. Like, we are social creatures. We have been able to survive for as long as we have as a human race because of our collaboration and connection with each other. We're not the strongest animal. We're not the toughest predator, but by working in groups and working together, we've been able to essentially become the apex animal on the planet. And we do need social interaction, most of us.
And I do know some married couples where the compatibility is really high. So lucky for you, like you hit the jackpot, whoever wrote that question, where you must then play together and laugh together and have deep conversations together, and all the elements of who you are, there's some compatibility that makes that partner your best friend. And so maybe you need to outsource that less. But I will say there's got to be, even in those great marriages, which are really lottery marriages, there's still probably at least one aspect of you where it's not compatible, right? Maybe she's not the best person, or he's not the best person for this kind of conversation, or going fishing, or, there are 1,000 facets to who you are. It's great that most of those line up with your partner. That's really amazing. But there's going to be a couple spaces that don't, that it may be really fulfilling to explore that with another person, just so all of you is really seen and loved somewhere, even if not in that marriage. So that, yeah, some people need that more and less. My husband and I have a lot of compatibility for our values. But as far as like going into deep spaces, we're not as compatible there. And so we know that he loves to go hiking and like triathlons, and that doesn't super interest me. And so he goes in triathlons with his friends, and I go to lunch dates where we talk about the meaning of life, and we're totally open with that. So it's really finding those places where you're not totally compatible, and finding friends that can fill that, so you can feel like all of you is seen and loved by at least someone, which really makes you feel really whole and safe and loved and belong.
You have this note here: being cool is the straitjacket. What do you mean
Yeah,
by
it's that?
something
something that she says, something Brene Brown says. So some of my notes have been just listening to Brene Brown and jotting down what she says, because obviously she's the lead researcher on how do we do relationships better. And so for laughter, song, and dance, she said the number one reason why adults don't do that is because we want to look cool. And so being cool, or trying to appear cool, or feeling like we should be cool, or does a cool person do this, all of that narrative in our brains is the thing that shuts off adult play. And so that was really interesting. And so I want to, next time that I have the opportunity to sing or dance, I had one, I think the last time that I really had an opportunity and I missed it, like, I'll be honest, I missed it, was I went to like a pagan women's night, and we were doing like a moon ceremony, and we were walking, and it's almost like a trance. So you're walking to this certain rhythm, and it's very meditative, and you're doing it with other women, and you kind of actually go into a little bit of a trance. It's very interesting. And then at some point, the older lady, who was this beautiful soul, really has this really strong earthy spirituality, and she just began to freely dance, just whatever her body wanted to do. And she was opening the space that, hey, if you want to move your body here however you want to, just let it go, let's dance. And some of the women did, but most of us didn't. And I was the one that I couldn't get there. So it's something that I want to cultivate more, because I'm not great at it. And when I think of adult play, I really think of sports. Sports is where I like to play the most. But then I tore my ACL a few years ago, and so I'm noticing that by losing my ability to play sports, I've lost a huge outlet for adult play that I haven't replaced, and that's a need. And I noticed it when I was kind of preparing some notes for this. So I definitely want to learn how to play better as an adult.
I've always wanted to sing and dance socially, and I've always felt this immense amount of shame. Like, I'm not a good dancer and I'm not a good singer, so I'm not even going to try.
I have seen you do karaoke.
Yeah, in the last
I've
couple
seen
of
you
years,
rap.
the last couple of years, I have stepped out of my comfort zone and just decided to do it anyway.
Good for you.
And it is fun. If that's something you're pulled towards, my 2 cents is do it anyway. I have friends who dance very uniquely, and they risk potential mocking and shame, but it never comes across that way. They just dance themselves, they just dance the way they dance.
If anything, I'm envious. Like, look at that guy doing his thing over there. I wish I could do that,
Yeah. So I think when you own it, and you're around people who want to be them, they're going to make room for you to be you, and they accept those differences pretty easily. And so it feels like a big risk, but I don't think it's as big. Once you find folks that want to be vulnerable, they're going to give you room to be vulnerable too.
Mm-hmm.
And it, even though you feel like it's a huge risk, it really, I don't think is.
Yeah. And so I thought the last time I saw you, you had posted something, or I can't remember where I saw it, where you were rapping and doing karaoke. And I was immensely just like proud of you. Like, because I know that I know where you came from. Like, I know who you were 10 years ago, right? That you would have really struggled with that 10 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And I just thought, good for you. So I started thinking to myself, what would I do if I was in that scenario and do karaoke? Like, what would be what would be my expression of play in this kind of karaoke space? And the thing that came to mind, and I'll have to do it someday because now you're gonna hold me accountable, is I love the musical Hamilton because I'm a history person and I can rap the whole thing. And so I was like, if I could do anything, I would just want to rap Hamilton and just go for it in public. Like that would be a uniquely Brit style of play. So that's going to be my challenge to myself. I'm going to find some way to rap Hamilton with friends who can appreciate me doing my weird thing.
Okay, maybe
I'm gonna
we'll
do
make
it.
that happen when you're in Southern Utah.
Yeah.
I put here, qualities: trust, equality, compassion, honesty, independence. Talks about those being the foundation of a strong and healthy friendship. It can be hard to recognize when a friendship is weak in some areas. It is always possible to improve yourself and your relationship with a friend. There is an accountability. I remember in the past, I remember at a party, I said something very sexist and I was trying to be funny, but it wasn't. And this friend had enough wherewithal to go like, "Hey, Bill, let me take you aside. Let me just tell you, like, that was a dick move." And she was right, 100% right. And in friendship, we have to have some space to be corrected and to have somebody go like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. I know you're trying to be you, but you're bumping too hard into someone else." And so I love this idea of like accountability, where if you really care about your friends and you really want to be in relationships where they care about you, there has to be some safe space for feedback and for criticism. And if we can't take criticism, if we're just adamant that I'm just going to be me at the expense of bumping into others, then you're probably going to struggle to maintain friendships. And I think some friendships start off really strong, and as you get to know each other, you begin to see whatever flaws somebody has, and sometimes they just bump into each other too hard. I had a party at my house about a month and a half ago, and it was open to anybody. Anybody could come. It was announced in the Southern Utah Post-Mormon group, and so a bunch of people came that I didn't even know. And this one gentleman comes, and his point of view was so at odds with mine that I just couldn't have been. It would have been all the work in the world to be friends. And so I didn't want to be rude to him. I essentially said to him, because he made his point, and his point was very traumatic for me and triggering for me. And I just stated my different perspective and essentially said, like, you're just too far away from where I'm at. I'm not going to be able to engage you in this space. It's too hard for me. And I had to walk away. And I wasn't trying to hurt his feelings. I wasn't trying to be rude or be an ass, but it really was where the way that person saw the world was so different than the way I saw the world. So as you're pointing out too, as we're trying to meet new people, you're just not going to be a fit for everyone. Some folks aren't a good fit for you, and that's okay. Like, you're allowed to go like, this isn't going to be a space that I'm going to benefit from.
Yeah. But if you're leading from, I'm going to be myself, then you're setting it up so that even if it doesn't work out, it's not because you're broken, right? It's not because they're rejecting you. Just didn't work out. Move on to the next person. But, what came to mind there was when a dear friend of mine, who's still active in the church, and because our relationship was so important, we have kept our friendship, even though she's active and now I'm not. And it was one of those times where she checked me because our relationship was so valuable to her, and bless her for that. So there was one time she sent me a picture of it was her son passing the sacrament, and she just meant it as like, look how cute, right? And I was just in a mood. Like, I was in a pissy mood. It was Sunday. I don't know what my issue was. I was going through something. And I just snapped back something like, I wish your older daughter could do that too, right? Because I'm in a pissy mood and I'm angry at something. And so she took some time, and then she responded back and she said, I'm saying this because, our relationship is so important to me, because if it wasn't important, then you just like man, that guy's a jerk and I'm just not going to invest anything more in this relationship. But because the relationship was important to her, she reached out and said, I just need you to know how that made me feel. And I was just sharing a picture of my son with you. Like, that wasn't okay to just snap at me like that. And she was right, and I apologized. But the reason she did it was because she wanted to invest in our friendship. And so you have to check each other when you hit a boundary with each other. And if you don't, then the relationship dissipates in some way, right? Because someone stepped on a boundary and you didn't say anything, and now you're just going to start to kind of go like this. So to her credit, she checked me on it, and I apologized. But it was because the relationship was something she wanted to invest energy in. And so we do have to do that and be subject to that to our friends from time to time.
Yeah. To be silent means that, like you point out, going forward, you're going to reduce the number of times you're in that person's space.
Yeah.
If you're like, man, that person just pisses me off every time with this thing, rather than speak up about the thing and let them know and give them a chance to kind of self-correct how they're bumping into you, you just eventually just decide you don't want to be in that person's space at all. And I'm not going to say often or very little. I'm not going to give a degree to it, but there are certainly places where a little self-correction could have happened and the friendship could have stayed really strong. And but an inability to be honest with another person about where they're bumping into you, it feels less risky on the front end, but it ends up often destroying a friendship.
Right.
I wanted to skip ahead. We're sort of heading towards running out of time here. So I wanted to skip ahead a little bit. There's this Buddhist story, the story of an eager young monk, and I don't know how to pronounce that, Megiha, who wanted to practice meditation alone in an especially peaceful and beautiful mango grove. But Megiha's meditation was anything but peaceful and beautiful. To his shock, he found his mind a snarl of malicious, lustful, and confused thoughts, probably because his practice was too self-involved. When Megiha rushed back to report his confusing experience, Buddha was not surprised. He took the opportunity to give Megiha what he must have hoped was a relevant teaching. 5 things induced release of heart and lasting peace. The Buddha told him, first, a lovely intimacy with good friends. Second, virtuous conduct. Third, frequent conversation that inspires and encourages practice. Fourth, diligence, energy, and enthusiasm for the good. Fifth, insight into impermanence. I thought it was interesting that the first thing the Buddha allegedly says in that moment is first, a lovely intimacy with good friends. And then that third one, which I think is what good friends do, frequent conversation that inspires and encourages practice. When I'm in a social setting with my friends, I'm constantly asking them what they're reading, what they're watching, what they're thinking about, what in their life is really hard, what in their life is really good, and give them a chance to teach me how they're handling life. And it is deeply beneficial. And also that first one, that idea of lovely intimacy with good friends, our friends here in Southern Utah, there is a lovely intimacy between them. It really is a beautiful thing to kind of go like, wow, look at where this community has come to. These people love to be in space with each other, and they are so real with each other. There really is no conversation you can't have. And to me, that's really cool. Any thoughts there?
I also think that it's really outlining a spiritual path. A deep, intimate social life is not just like a need because we're primates. It actually is a spiritual path, right? So when that friend checked me, that was a moment for me to check myself and look in the mirror and have to fix and eat my humble pie and apologize and say all those things. So what I love about this story that you're bringing in is that it's not just this primal need that we're doing to play with each other as adults and to be friends, but the opportunity for our social life to be a spiritual path. And I think when I was more active in religion, there were, opportunities for spiritual things as you're listening to maybe you're preparing a lesson or you're listening to someone else's lesson. But it wasn't, there was less risk and there was less intimacy. So there was less growth. So when I went to church because everybody's risking less, because nobody's being fully vulnerable. We're all putting on a mask. Yeah, you bump into each other and you learn things from each other, but it was a low risk, low reward. But with my deeply intimate friends, now what Buddha's talking about here is this isn't just friends, this is a spiritual path of being intimate with other people is a mirror where you are going to have to do a lot of growth, right? Because you're learning about yourself and others and different ways to look at the world, and people are checking your behavior and you're exploring things and you're pushing on boundaries. I mean, these are deeply spiritual exploring places that isn't just driven by a biological need to have friends. It's spiritual too.
Yeah. You mentioned spiritual friendship. Spiritual friendship requires two elements, truth and tenderness. You've hit on those with that personal story. We need to be direct with each other and be soft and kind. Like that's what friendships are. There are lots of times where I've disagreed with my friends. They'll say something and I can sense their blind spot, or I'll say something and they sense my blind spot, and they will kindly correct me. Like, hey, you may not be aware, but what you seem to think is the normal human experience, my experience is very different than that. And so there's a way to kind of correct each other, but not hurt feelings in the midst of it, right? And then it says here, spiritual friends are honest with one another. They have courage. They take risk. They speak from the standpoint of truthfulness, not expediency. That's a big deal. When my friends go astray, at least as far as I can see, I must speak up. And I expect the same from them as well. Yet tenderness is equally important. Dojin writes of the power of kind speech. Speak to sentient beings as you would to a baby. Speak with as much tender love and sweetness. I can receive a true friend's criticism with loving kindness because it comes from a loving heart, seeking only my benefit and well-being. And if I find I am lacking in tenderness, speaking what I consider to be the truth out of defensiveness or separateness, I have to discern this. I have to work on healing causes within myself of this breach of kindness. I need to keep my peace until I'm ready to speak with love. To me, that's a big deal. It's sometimes in our being poked by something, we lash out in correction. And the suggestion here in this advice is maybe hold our tongue until we can come from a healthier place. And that to me seems really useful as well.
I do think that both of us, because you've been public for a lot longer than I have, so you've been doing this a lot longer, me more recently. But there have been times where we have criticized someone's worldview from a place of love, in the sense that I see that you're trying to make sense of the world this way. I'm really offering you a different idea that I think is going to be better for you, a better foundation for you to build your life on, because I genuinely love you and I don't want you to keep having a faith crisis because you're finding some new spiritual guru who's going to let you down or whatever. I've seen both of us criticize worldviews from that place of like, hey, I think that there's a better way to do this. I think there's a better way to do spirituality where we don't have to do that move, or we don't have to believe that thing. But I've also seen both of us publicly like not come from that place.
You're really only saying like Bill does that because I agree.
There are multiple times, let's say at least 5 times a month, I will regret an interchange I had on Facebook where it just pulled out. I wasn't there. I wasn't offering a better idea from a place of love. And I've thought about this, and what do you think of this? I think this is better for you in your life, and I think there's a better way to do spirituality. I can do that. But I get dragged into Facebook debates and I get ugly and it's not great and I regret it. And I have to take Facebook breaks and put myself in jail sometimes, because it's just sometimes tough, because I just get so frustrated with what I see as just a really dumb idea. And they look at me like I'm crazy, and it's just not good. And it's not changing anybody's mind.
No.
If anything, it's making people like trust me less because I'm acting like a jerk. And 100% I do that. It's hard. It's hard to challenge someone's worldview from a place of love because I think that this worldview is spirituality better for you. But I hope both of us can get better at it.
I am aware of that. And like you said, 5 times a month. I think Dan Hardy, who made a comment earlier, I probably do it to him about 5 times a month. And so I'm aware, and I also want to be better in these exchanges. As soon as I walk away from them, like, I could have been much more Buddhist. I could have been so much more present and kind and still made my point, but did so from a place of love and kindness rather than putting someone in their place.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I'm determined to be better at that. And thank you for mentioning that, because I think in social media that becomes so easy. It's just there's just a name with no
Yes,
real
it's
personality
hard.
or connection.
It's hard to remember that there's a human behind what I think is a really stupid idea or really bad theology.
Yep, totally.
And I get caught in Facebook debates. And I enjoy debates, which is part of the problem. I really enjoy debates. And so, man, I'll waste 2 hours like nothing and regret it for the rest of the week because I have kids. I can't be debating people on Facebook, and I'm not changing anybody's mind. And
No.
I'm the first to admit, like, I got to do better at that.
Love it. Mida Suda, I don't know what that is, but it says monks, a friend endowed with 7 qualities is worth associating with. So somebody's talking to the monks. Monks, a friend endowed with 7 qualities is worth associating with. Which 7? He gives what is hard to give. He does what is hard to do. He endures what is hard to endure. He reveals his secrets to you. He keeps your secrets, which, by the way, I want to note, the number one thing I would suggest if you want to be a good friend to others is you recognize which of their stories are sacred, and you do not go about sharing other people's sacred stories.
Yeah. I call it the vault, which is from Seinfeld, and I'll tell my friends, like, this is for the vault.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. So he keeps your secrets. When misfortune strikes, he doesn't abandon you. When you're down and out, he doesn't look down on you. A friend endowed with these 7 qualities is worth associating with. In our religious system right now, there's this TV show on Hulu, Under the Banner of Heaven. And somebody reached out to me this week who was friends with Dan Lafferty prior to all of this stuff happening. And they still reach out to him once a week or so and talk to him on the phone while he's in prison. And I'm amazed at that. Like, in my mind, I'm going, if one of my friends did what that person did, I just would have ended the friendship. It doesn't seem beneficial to me to try to make that work. And yet this person had maintained friendship over years and years and years in the midst of seeing all of that came with that. And to me, that was deeply impressive. Like, I don't want my friends to abandon me when I make a mistake. And in this situation, this friend didn't abandon this person who had done an atrocious act. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that reminds me of just this idea that you can only meet people as deeply as they've met themselves. So in order for me to do something like that, is you first have to kind of meet the devil in you in order to be friends with someone where the devil came out, right? Killed a kid, right? And so I don't think you can do that until you've met the devil within. And I find that one of the best things about really doing shadow work, which we've talked about on this podcast a lot, is that I can be friends with people and understand, or even not even be friends, but at least be more compassionate to the devil within and how that shows up in different people, because I've met that devil within myself. I remember the first time, this is real vulnerability here, but I remember the first time where I had a violent thought towards a child when I had postpartum depression, which I had never met that violent part of myself before. I would have totally said before that I'm a pacifist and I never had a violent thought in my life. But there's dark nights where it's not uncommon for women to have really scary thoughts. And so, when the woman was on death row for drowning her kids in the tub, because I had met myself, I met the devil within, I was able to look at that person, not wanting to be best friends maybe, but at least with some humanity, that I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this is your life, and look in a little bit more compassion and less judgment because I met that person within. So I think the more you do shadow work, the more you're able to do what you're talking about, which is to still understand people even when they do things that are really awful even. You're muted. You're muted.
So sorry. It says here the Buddha list 4 criteria to help us judge friends in the Sigalovada Sutta. Says, quote, young man, be aware of these 4 enemies disguised as friends: the taker, the talker, the flatterer, and the reckless companion. The taker can be identified by 4 things: by only taking, asking for a lot while giving little, performing duty out of fear, and offering service in order to gain something. 2, the talker. The talker can be identified by 4 things: by reminding of past generosity, promising future generosity, mouthing empty words of kindness, and protesting personal misfortune when called on to help. Number 3, the flatterer. The flatterer can be identified by 4 things: by supporting both bad and good behavior indiscriminately, praising you to your face, and putting you down behind your back. And then number 4, the reckless. The reckless companion can be identified by 4 things: by accompanying you in drinking, roaming around at night, partying, and gambling. Now, I don't mind a little reckless.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I know you don't.
Some of my funnest nights have involved those things. So I'm a little, and it's the thing when I had a conversation with Phil McLemore on it might have been this podcast, but before you came on board, I know we interviewed him.
I've listened to that twice because that was an interesting conversation.
Because I think sometimes there's this risk that even Buddhism goes too far. It says like these things are bad. And my experience is that's not exactly the way I feel about it. I feel like some amounts of drinking, partying, gambling can be done responsibly. And I just can't get on board with advocating entirely against those. Now, I want to be responsible. I want to talk about moderation and those kinds of things. But I've had friends before that were reckless, and I would have defined that very differently than folks you went out and had some fun with. So anyway, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I see that conversation come up a lot in spiritual places because there's a lot of conversation right now in reclaiming pleasure, which I think is really healthy. America comes from a Puritan background, which means that, no dancing, no drinking, no laughing, no whatever, because, it lets the devil in and then da-da-da-da-da. But, and so we're doing this kind of reclaiming pleasure as part of being human, as a great part of being human even. And that this idea that we have to be fasting all the time and in meditation 8 hours a day in order to be spiritual, that's a very aesthetic view. And so I think everyone in this spiritual space, as we're kind of trying to reclaim pleasure from our Puritan background, we're kind of seeing where that boundary is, and people debate about where that boundary is, which is why I found that conversation so helpful. I did listen to that one twice. And maybe for different people, it's, that boundary may be different for different people. Some people can handle a little bit more chaos and be okay and be safe and be moderate, and some people can't. But it's interesting to have that discussion that as we're reclaiming pleasure as part of being human, even part of having a spiritual life, how do we do that in a way that stays away from alcoholism and, all the things that those reckless behaviors can turn into. So it's very interesting conversation. If anyone's listening and hasn't listened to that episode, I really recommend it. It was really interesting. And it was interesting because you were in different places. That's what made that conversation so interesting.
Yeah, loving it. I wanted to talk for a moment about social etiquette. We don't need to spend much time here because I think it ties into how we make and keep friends. To me, it's always about extending grace. This party I had at my house with these other 3 couples a week and a half ago. There's this moment where this guy's in the hot tub. He's only spent now an hour and a half with me. We just got back from dinner. We get in the hot tub and we're just having this great conversation. And he goes, "Hey, I'm going to say something and I'm going to be really vulnerable." And my wife I can't remember how she worded it, but she looks over at me and tells me in some way that that's the signal we humans give when we're about to say something that we fear feeling shame over. And that seems like a no-brainer, but often when people go, I'm going to be vulnerable, and they say something, someone in the room makes a joke, or something gets said that essentially mocks the thing that just got shared by that person. And I just want to note that when someone tells you they're going to be vulnerable, you automatically should jump to, this might be one of their very sacred things. This is the moment where they're trying to expose themselves to you.
Yeah, it's like someone's heart is open. Like, don't go punching. Like, someone's heart is just, no protection out there. Yeah.
And it led to a beautiful conversation where this person opened up about something, and it was something that they felt a lot of shame over, and this group held it and communicated like, oh, like you do that thing, we do a similar thing, here's the thing we do. And it just made it really healthy for that person to be able to open up and talk. So just a note, when people say they're trying to share something vulnerable, it's one of those things that they are really fearful that you're going to not hold space for. I remember having a friend come to me once, and he was like, Bill, I want to tell you what my kink is. And I'm like, okay, all right. And he goes, but I fear that you're going to shame me about it. And he ended up saying what it was. And it was a nothing. It was a common thing that I think, 20% of the male population has. And I said, that's not mine, but here's mine. Mine's this thing. I said, we all have them. We all get turned on and turned off by things. That's normal human behavior. There's no reason why you need to feel shame in this space as you share who you are. That's no big deal. Couple other things about grace. When someone feels they are disrupting everyone's experience. I was out at dinner with some friends a few weeks ago, and this person, about a third of the way into dinner, started to feel sick. But we had planned, we had to cancel it once, and now we're coming together and do it again. And so there's a lot of pressure on this person to not mess up everyone else's night. And so this person, you could see they were feeling a lot of like, I don't want to feel judgment. I don't want to feel shame. This night's not going well for me, but I don't know what to do. And I think in most situations when this kind of thing happens, we all just go quiet. We just don't address it. Meanwhile, in everyone else's mind, you're going like, I hope they feel better. I really feel bad that they don't feel good. But we somehow don't know to voice it in a way that makes them feel safe. So I realized kind of what was going on, and I just said, hey, you really should do what's best for you. And there's no hurt coming over here to us. We really just care about you. And if you're not feeling well, we absolutely want to support you feeling safe and feeling okay. So let's just go ahead and wrap this up and get you out of here so that you can be okay. And that's what happened. The person ended up leaving a little early, and then we cut the dinner short, but there wasn't any hard feelings on our part. And I think often, even in times where there's no hard feelings, we don't seem to take the next step to relieve that person of the shame and judgment they're feeling. I had a cousin that we just so happened to be in the same place in Vegas. They came in for a music festival. We went to the music festival. We met up and weren't expecting it. This was a cousin from back in Ohio. And I had communicated, they wanted to go to breakfast with us in the morning. So the morning came, and originally they were going to meet us at our hotel, but they were running a little late. So I texted them and said, why don't you just meet us at the restaurant? But I can't remember how I worded it, but I worded it in a way that it could have been misunderstood. So they ended up coming to the original hotel. Now they're running way late. So now we're all sitting at breakfast wanting to order, and they're not there yet because they went to the wrong place first. And now they're making their way to us. I had enough wherewithal to go, they probably feel like shit right now. They're holding us up. They're feeling shame. They're probably running or walking super fast, breaking a sweat in the middle of summer in Vegas. Let me resolve this. So I just texted her and said, I went back and read the text. It was easily misunderstandable. I'm really sorry for having texted in a way that caused the misunderstanding. We are just super excited for you to join us. Take your time. Don't rush. When you get here, it's going to be perfectly okay. I love you, and I can't wait to see you.
Yeah, if I would have read that, my whole like that would have just totally
Yeah.
just, whew.
So the secret is
Okay.
give people that. And in your interactions, start to pick up on when people feel distressed or when a social situation is that they probably are feeling distress, and just go one step further to reassure them of what's in your head and what you're thinking and how much you care about them, and that whatever it is no big deal to you. It just goes so far, as you point out, to reduce the anxiety and distress in a single human being. And over the course of months, you can do that dozens and dozens of times.
Yeah. And again, that's a spiritual practice of empathy. Of I've been in that situation where I'm running to that meeting and I'm thinking I'm holding someone up, and that feels stressful, and you jumped out of your own experience for a second to see it from someone else's experience, which is again going back to this idea that being in friendship with people and doing things like that is spiritual work.
Yeah. Amen. Any other thoughts? That's essentially what I've got.
Yeah, I had one last thing.
Please.
I wanted to talk about, one difference. So this is again going back to Brene Brown. One difference, there's only one difference between people who report that they have love and belonging in their life and people who don't. One difference. And she said the only difference between these two groups of people, when she gets all the list of these people's lives and beliefs and all these things, is the belief that you are lovable. And so there is, as part of this foundation that we're talking about building a foundation to meet people and then making the jump through vulnerability and how to do that and how this is a spiritual practice. But I do think one of the steps that we need to talk about is that often before we can even do that, you do have to believe that you're worthy of love. And the reason that I bring this up is because this is a place where religion has a super helpful heuristic. And what I mean by heuristic is that there's some things in religion that are not quote unquote true, but the tool is more useful than not. And so it's very difficult in secular spaces to pull out the tool because religion has. So the example that Sam Harris uses is that if you're a gun person and you are looking at a gun, you never look down the barrel, right? You have this little routine that you do as if that there's a bullet in it. And if you show that there's no bullet in this gun and you give it to a friend, they also will never look down the barrel. They'll also do this little routine as if there's a gun, as if there's a bullet in the gun. Now, the truth is you saw that there's no bullet in the gun, but the tool, the trick of acting like there's a bullet in the gun is safer than just knowing if there's a bullet or not. So the heuristic, the tool, the ritual is actually more helpful than the quote unquote truth. So religion does have some of these things. And I think this is one of those places where religion has a little trick. Brene Brown, for example, very strong belief in God. One of the things that sometimes helps people get there is the belief that God made everyone and loves everyone and made them who they are. Therefore, you are deeply lovable. That's a tool that religion uses that is actually can be helpful for some people, because it's a little shortcut you can take to believing that you are lovable. And so for those of us who are in the post-religious space, and for the clients that I talk with who have lost their belief in God, you may have to do some work here to have a reason to believe that you are lovable, to build a relationship with yourself where you believe that you are worthy of love and belonging, because you no longer have the shortcut of believing that God made everyone the way that they are, therefore you're worthy of love. So there's a tool there that some people in the post-religious world have lost, and they have to build up by building up a relationship with yourself in order to believe that you're worthy of love. Thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I like that. If folks are going to be in relationship with others, on some degree, you have to believe you have something to offer, and that your being their friend brings something to the table. And often that is in recognizing whatever gifts you have, recognizing your intrinsic beauty and goodness, even in the midst of all of us having flaws and weaknesses and moments where we just don't do the right thing. And if we come to a situation not liking ourselves, we're going to be second guessing everything in an interaction, and the real connection's never going to have fertile ground to take place.
Yeah, so Brene Brown studied these groups of people and thought, are the people who learned how to love each other, love themselves, did they have easier lives, two parents, And she said, no, like the trauma is spread out across the board. And she said, everyone has a story that'll break your heart. And I think that that's true. And so it wasn't that the people who had learned that they were lovable came from better backgrounds. That wasn't true. And so as this listener added, one of the things that she gives the church credit for is that it helped her, it gave her a little tool to help her believe that she was lovable and helped her believe it. And so that may be the place if you're listening to this and wanting to make better friends, that may be a place to do work too, because if you've lost that tool of believing that God made you just the way that you are, it may take a little bit more work to find out, what are my spiritual gifts? What do I have to offer to someone? What's my some of that is maybe, what's my Enneagram number and what do I contribute? And, building that trust within yourself, that may be a place to start, because you can't have love and belonging in your life if you don't believe that you're worthy of it. And so that may be a place where people also get stuck, where it's really good then to do spiritual work of learning who you are and the gifts that you have. And once you develop that, then you'll be better when you start trying to make connections to other people, because you'll believe that you have something to offer.
Beautiful, beautiful. Anything else?
Nope, that's it for me. Except that I just love being your friend, Bill. You're a great friend. This was
awesome. Same, back at you. It's been a lot of years now from a distance, and now with this chance to interact on a weekly basis, and I'm loving it. To all you folks out there, again, maybe just to say, I think the two things that'll kill a friendship is gossip, not handling people's sacred stories with care, and being a taker. If you're always needing something but not giving back. And we've gone over all these good qualities, and I think community is important, especially since most of us really do need friends and social interaction to be healthy and to enjoy our life around us. And so my 2 cents, folks, is put yourselves out there, take some risk, try to meet somebody new. If you need community, it's not going to happen on its own. You've got to start putting yourself out there. And as you said, Britt, be vulnerable, be yourself, share who you are, and give people a chance. And some will say no, but if you do it 50 times, I'm guessing you're going to make 5 or 10 friends.
Yeah.
If you take that risk. So appreciate you today. And I hope folks got something out of this conversation.
Yep. Thanks, Bill. Bye.
Take it easy.
This has been another Almost Awakened episode. Check us out at almostawakened.org, where you can check out past episodes, make a donation to keep this podcast running, email us a question or comment, or find out more about the resources shared in today's episode. For coaching opportunities or extra support, visit NoNonsenseSpirituality.com to meet with Certified Spiritual Director Brittany Hartley.